John, welcome to the podcast. It is so excellent to have you here.
Thanks, Jeff, and it's really great to be here. I really appreciate the invitation.
We are so excited to have you here to celebrate the 25th anniversary of Simple Justice, which kicked off the Benjamin Justice Mystery Series. Now, for those who are unfamiliar with this, tell us about the series.
Well, Justice is a former reporter who's been ruined by a Pulitzer scandal of his own making, and he's grieving the loss of a lover to AIDS, living reclusively in West Hollywood, and the novel's set in 1994. Which was a pivotal year in the midst of a crime wave and the AIDS epidemic peaking, and a lot going on. And there's always a lot going on in West Hollywood anyway, but he's kind of hiding out in a little apartment, trying to stay away from people. That's kind of his goal. He's a very hard guy to live with. He's abrasive, opinionated, volatile, sometimes violent, but readers still seem to be engaged with him, at least the ones who followed the series, and I had some really loyal readers through the years. Justice gets involved when an old editor visits him and tempts him and guilts him into getting involved into an investigation involving a murder outside a gay bar in Silver Lake, which is a heavily gay neighborhood just east of West Hollywood. And Justice gets involved almost against his will, but when he realizes a confession by a teenager to the murder outside this gay bar is suspect, there's something fishy about it. He sees things other people don't see, which is what made him a great investigative reporter. He just feels compelled to get more and more involved, which he does with an investigative reporter, Alexandra Templeton, a young black reporter who's really promising, really has a great career ahead of her, but really resents Justice for the Pulitzer scandal that he got involved in. And together they wend their way through this very murky investigation, which becomes very dangerous. And in the end, it collides with Justice's own troubled past. And in a sense, Alexandra has to solve Justice's dark past in order for the two of them to move together productively and solve the murder on a deadline at the end of the story.
It sounds like there's a lot of actual history involved in the book. You touched on the AIDS crisis at the time, the crime wave that was happening in West Hollywood. Did all of that kind of blend together to inspire this particular story and then the series as well?
You know, when I sat down to write this, I had decades as a journalist. I was 50 years old when I wrote the book. And I really was at a time, I was moved into television reporting, first news, and then documentary writing, and I was kind of leaving my newspaper and magazine reporting behind for the most part. And when I sat down to write it, I just said, this book has to be different from anything you've done before. You've got to reach deeper and find something special, because otherwise there's no point in writing a novel like this. And I just sat down to write, and the minute I started writing in the first person in Justice's voice, kind of just from my gut, this character emerged and he took over, so obviously it was pretty close to me in my heart. And I wrote the first draft in 6 weeks. So there was just a lot of West Hollywood in it, a lot of me in it, a lot of my neighbors and my history and the whole gay movement and AIDS and everything else that had taken place over the last 20, 25 years of my life. I came out in my mid-20s. And that was what ended up being Simple Justice, this kind of dark, violent, very sexually charged, emotionally charged book, which kind of set it apart from a lot of the mystery writing that was being done in those days, or at least that was getting noticed.
And you mentioned your career in journalism, and you'd written some documentary-style television as well. Had you ever seen yourself writing a novel?
If I probably took a hard, truthful look back at myself, it probably had been in the mix for a long time, but I didn't have the confidence to admit that. But after I read Walter Mosley's Devil in a Blue Dress at the suggestion of a friend, I started thinking very hard about writing a novel of my own. And please don't think that I'm comparing myself to Walter Mosley at all, but that book really inspired me because of the history in it, the politics in it, the social issues that he blended so beautifully with the character of E.Z. Rollins in the post-war years in South Central Los Angeles. And that's really when I started thinking about writing a novel of my own. And then in terms of the history of West Hollywood, the history of the gay movement that worked itself into Simple Justice, when I revised the book in the past 6 or 8 months, I really tried to accentuate all that. I felt like I was writing a time capsule of 1994 in West Hollywood, because West Hollywood has changed so much since then. It's really development-driven now. It was never a quiet place when I lived here, but it's not the same city it was, and I really wanted to capture that as I revised, and I added a lot of historic detail and cultural detail in the revision.
For people who may have read the original, how much new material would you say are they going to find if they pick up this re-release?
Well, I hope the writing is better, because when ReQueered Tales asked if they could reprint my books, they were going out of print, and I have to give a nod to John Michelson, an author in Atlanta, who interviewed me for his blog about 3 years ago, and thereafter, his Facebook LGBT crime writing group, they started discussing my novel and the fact that it was going out of print. And a group of them got together and wanted to volunteer their specialized skills to help me bring my Justice series back, starting with Simple Justice. And that evolved into a full-fledged royalty-paying publisher, ReQueered Tales, put together by this handful of passionate readers out of this Facebook group. It was really quite remarkable what's happened. They've now got more than 30 titles in print with nearly 20 authors. They're rescuing out-of-print LGBTQ classics. And John started all that after he interviewed me for his blog.
Could you have imagined at some point that the books would come charging back in such a big way 25 years after they came out?
No, I never expected this. In fact, when this Facebook group contacted me, and John actually personally contacted me, he was the lead guy at the time, I was completely flabbergasted. To be honest, I was very skeptical that this could work. How could a bunch of readers, as smart and skilled as they were in their own ways, with some writers among them, bring back an entire mystery series? I just was very skeptical, but I encouraged it, and I was grateful. And then it eventually evolved over about a year into this remarkable publisher that has all these titles out, bringing back all these LGBTQ classics that otherwise would be out of print. I wanted to go back to the question you asked about what changes I've made. Did I make many changes when I did the revisions to Simple Justice? I did quite a bit of revision on the novel. When I read it, I was really unhappy with a lot of the writing. As I told a friend, I eliminated about 6 or 8 cliches, really bad cliches, in the first 2 or 3 chapters that I'm sure I thought were brilliant at the time. There was a lot of ragged writing, and there were plot inconsistencies and other issues in the book. And I told ReQueered Tales that I really wanted to revise the books before they came back into print, and that's what I spent much of the next year doing. I cut a couple of characters. I added 2 new characters, one quite important. I cut 2 subplots that were minor. I didn't mess with the structure too much, because when you start messing with the structure of a multi-suspect mystery series, when you get into the guts of that, you really can go down a rabbit hole, and I just didn't have the time with deadlines, and frankly, I didn't have the physical and mental stamina to just tear the book apart and start over. I wouldn't have published Simple Justice again if I couldn't have revised it first and cleaned up a lot of things that I found wrong with it. So you're seeing, if not a new Simple Justice, a heavily revised Simple Justice, an updated Simple Justice. And one thing that I was able to do with hindsight, looking back, was to add more historic and cultural history with concrete detail that I felt enhanced the book. And I hope I'm right. The readers will be the judge in the long run.
And you wrote Simple Justice originally in, if I did the math right, it's like 1996. So you were writing 2 years back at that point, back into 1994. So coming at it now with a whole new lens with the time past, I can't imagine, being able to historically set the importance of things that were going on in that time frame.
I actually wrote it in 95, so I was looking back from about a year. And yeah, there was just so much I missed. And one of the things I added to the book as a thread, it's a very minor thread, but I felt it really helped the motivation of Justice's old editor, Harry Brodsky, to come out of the woodwork and get him involved in this investigation, and that was the O.J. Simpson trial. That was all going on in the background at the time the novel was set, but it was never mentioned in the first novel. Now it's threaded in to the revisions of Simple Justice, and I did it purposely to sort of shore up some of the motivations in the book.
And of course, when you were writing it and where it's set, we were in the midst of political upheaval then and the epidemic of AIDS. And now as you're bringing this book back out, we're in another political upheaval and a new epidemic with COVID-19. What's it like to see those parallels?
Yeah, that was really interesting for me as a writer because 1994 was a pivotal year. That was when Bill Clinton had a shaky first term, and the Republicans put up quite a challenge, and I believe they took control of Congress. So you had a pivotal election year with a Republican resurgence. You had a crime wave that was virtually at its peak, certainly in terms of violence in Los Angeles. You had AIDS peaking as an epidemic. You had equal rights for women as a huge issue. And then you switch to 2020 and all these similar issues, these parallel issues, if you will, going on as I'm rewriting. And I think it probably affected my rewriting as much unconsciously as consciously. Two characters really got my attention as I revised. One was Senator Masterman's son, for those who've read the book already. I renamed him Casey, by the way. He doesn't have the same first name as his father because that became a nightmare when I had him in the same scene, trying to refer to each of them. But Casey, I felt needed more weight and clarity as a character, so I really worked on him. And then Alexandra Templeton, the young black reporter who partners with Justice on this murder investigation. I felt that as an author, I had to give her more respect. She's always a strong character in the book, a very sympathetic character, but I just felt she needed more dignity. She was probably the character that got the most work, even though a lot of what's changed about her and what I hope is improved about her is maybe in nuance instead of broad changes. A lot of it's in the conversation and the interplay between her and Justice. And so there were definitely some changes that were influenced by the period that we're in now.
Are you making similar revisions to the rest of the books that will be coming out?
One by one, I'm going to revise each one unless I just collapse and can't do it. Simple Justice, I think, is the one that's needed the most work. It was my first novel. I was learning as I wrote. It was probably the most complex. I think the plot needed the most work. I don't think any of the other books will take that much work. I know the second one is going to need some because it was my second novel, and while I was writing that novel, I got a really nice note from Michael Conley, who had won the Edgar Award for Best First Novel a few years before me for Black Echo. And I had never met him, but we'd worked together at the LA Times around the same time, and our years paralleled there. And I had interviewed him for Writer's Digest before my book came out. And he sent me a note congratulating me on winning the Edgar a few years after him, the same Edgar for Best First Novel, and said, just a suggestion, be careful. Second novels are often much harder to write, and you might want to give yourself more time. And he was absolutely right. Revision of Justice is the second one, and it was a very tough novel to write because I used up so much in the first novel I felt empty in a sense. I used things up creatively, emotionally, in terms of background and things I wanted to write about, things I wanted to express, and I sort of had trouble finding what the hook was for me in the second novel. And it was a real hard novel to write. Having said that, for any writers that are listening, I would never advise holding things out of your first novel to save for your second novel. Because if you don't write the best novel you can write, the novel you were born to write, the first time out, there's unlikely going to be a second novel. So I would say give it your all in the first one, and then just plan on working harder on that second book. It'll work out. You just maybe have to dig a little deeper.
For the mysteries that Justice is solving, where did the inspiration for those come through the books? Was it kind of a ripped from the headlines thing, or just the fun of making stuff up?
All over the place. Sometimes headlines, sometimes a piece of music, sometimes looking out my window at something visually. You know, they're really all over the place. Plotting is the hardest thing for me. It's really difficult. I tend to find my characters through dialogue. Once I get them interacting and talking, I learn more about them, and then I go back and do a lot of revision later, trying to strengthen them. Plotting is difficult. I really admire mystery writers who come up with these ingenious, clever, intricate plots that you feel you've never quite seen before. I'm not that writer. I have to work really hard at it. But, you know, you have to go with your strengths and weaknesses, and you have to emphasize your strengths and trying to work hard and shore up your weaknesses, and that's basically what I do with those. And honestly, I can't remember the plots of most of my novels. So I'm going to be rediscovering them with any readers out there who might be picking up the series. I'll be rediscovering them before I revise those, because I really don't remember the plot intricacies and many of the characters and plot twists in these books. I'm rediscovering them as I sit down to revise. Opening a book I haven't seen or read in 25 years, except for passages maybe at readings, and rediscovering it and getting down to rewriting, it's a wonderful process. I love it. And some writers absolutely hate the rewriting process because it's extremely arduous. You just have to really commit and clear your head and find that thing that separates professional writers from less professional writers, which is that objectivity you have to develop in which you become the strictest judge of your own work, and you have to become kind of your own boss and the toughest boss you've ever had, and look at your work with as much humility as possible and realize it can be made better. If I had a chance now, I'd probably sit back down with Simple Justice for another couple of months and go through it 3 or 4 times. I drove ReQueered Tales crazy, and I apologize to them. They were so patient with me. And it really was months of work, and I missed a deadline or two, and they were so patient and good to me, and I will be forever grateful for that.
You mentioned the Edgar Award a few minutes ago, which Simple Justice won when it came out as Best First Novel. And the series also got nominated and won multiple Lambda Literary Awards over its time. What do you think about the series caught so many people's attention?
I was very, very lucky. I don't know if it's true, but I've been told by a number of people through the years that was the first gay-themed mystery novel by an openly gay author to win an Edgar. And it was a pretty big deal. And it certainly made a big difference for me because gay novels just weren't getting a lot of mainstream attention at the time outside of Joseph Hansen and Michael Nava. Everybody pretty much struggled to get any attention, and then the Edgar kind of reinforced that, and it really helped the series. The series ended up going out of print after 8 books, but the Edgar was an important part of keeping it alive for 10, 12 years.
Simple Justice is also coming out with a new foreword from Christopher Rice, who, of course, is one of the contemporary kind of torchbearers for mystery and thriller. How did he come to be involved?
Well, Christopher and I have been friends for a long time, going way back to, I wish I could remember the year the Lammies were in Chicago, and we were both up for a Lammy in the Best Gay Men's Mystery category. And I met him there and found out that he lived here in West Hollywood, just a few blocks from me, and we became friends. And honestly, after I'd talked to him and after I saw how smart he was, how insightful he was, in addition to being such a good writer, I realized he was kind of, to me, the next torchbearer for gay mystery writing, gay crime writing. I really felt that strongly, and I went out of my way to befriend him and try to introduce him to things like Mystery Writers of America, Sisters in Crime. I remember in fact, he alludes to this in the foreword, I suggested that he read Ross Macdonald because he was real keen on reading as much mystery writing as he could, and his mom had suggested to him Raymond Chandler and Dashiell Hammett, and I added Ross Macdonald to that because he was my favorite of that whole genre, in addition to many other writers I really enjoyed. But Chris and I became friends, and we, kind of supported each other in different ways through the years. And so when the book was getting ready to go into production, I just shot him an email. We hadn't seen each other in a while, but I asked him if he'd write the foreword. I can't think of anyone else I would ask, and I kind of hoped he would kind of put Simple Justice, but also Joseph Hansen, Michael Nava, and others in historical perspective, which he did. And he just wrote what I thought was an eloquent and, as usual, very insightful, smart, intelligent foreword for the book. It was awfully flattering toward me, and I'll take it, but I was kind of blushing as I read it. He was very sweet, and I think that foreword stands on its own as a piece of writing, and perhaps he'll find some future mileage for that particular piece, because it's something I feel people should read, not because of me, but because of what he has to say about LGBT writing in general and gay activism and other issues that are important to all of us.
Well, we're really excited that this is coming back out, and we're so very happy you could come to the podcast and tell everybody about this 25th anniversary edition. And we'll certainly be linking in the show notes to this particular book, which comes out the very week that this episode drops. And we'll keep everybody up to date as the future editions come out as well. Thank you so much for being here. It's been a real treat to talk to you.
Jeff, it's been my pleasure, and please give my best to your hubby, and good luck with the show in the future. You're doing great things with it, and it's really an honor to be on.